Former First Lady Nancy Reagan will be laid to rest on Friday beside her husband at the Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. The former First Lady died yesterday of congestive heart failure at her home in Los Angeles at the age of 94. Paul Kengor is the author of 6 books on Ronald Reagan, including the bestsellers God and Ronald Reagan and The Crusader. And he has a remarkable untold story about Nancy, shared exclusively here. Paul, great to see you. So
Thank you, Megan.
You were contacted by a pastor several years ago who was present when Nancy Reagan was discussing the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan's life. And what did he tell you he heard?
Yeah, it was an amazing thing. So he called me in February 2006. This was the Reverend Louis Evans, who was the pastor of the Reagan's Church, National Presbyterian Church in Washington. And he had read my book on the faith of Ronald Reagan, God and Ronald Reagan. That came out in 2004. I didn't interview him for the book because I didn't know him, so I didn't know how to reach him. So he called me a couple years later, and clearly, Megan, he was he was realizing it was getting near the end of his life, and he wanted to get this information to me. So he told me some stuff about Ronald Reagan and his faith, and then he said, now I haven't mentioned Nancy Reagan, have I? And I said, no, you haven't. And he said, well, I want to tell you something about her as well. And he said that when Ronald Reagan was shot, March 30th, 1981, Nancy called the Reverend Evans, and apparently she was in need of some spiritual counseling. She wanted to talk to him. So he went over to the White House to meet with her, and the Reverend Billy Graham was there. Frank Sinatra and his wife were there. They were close to the Reagans. A California businessman that Reverend Evans didn't remember his name. And Nancy was sitting there, and she said, you know, I'm struggling with this feeling of failed responsibility. And Evans thought that was odd, and he said, well, why is that? And she said, because I always stand next to Ronnie on his left side, and he was shot on his left side. And if I had only been there when he was walking to that car on his left side, I could have taken that bullet for Ronnie.
Wow.
And Evans was shocked by that. I was shocked by it. I said, wow. I asked him to repeat it again. He repeated it. And when I told this story to Bill Clark, who was really close to both Reagans, I was Clark's biographer, and we were working on Clark's biography at the time. Clark had been Reagan's chief of staff back in Sacramento. He knew both the Reagans.
Understood.
When I told him this story, Bill Clark said, you know, that doesn't surprise me.
I got to go, Paul. My apologies. We're up against a hard break. Otherwise, I could listen to this all day. But thank you for sharing the beautiful memory.
Sure thing.